Слово предоставляется нашему финскому соседу, коллеге, ученому Jussi-Pekka Hakkarainen. Доклад на английском языке, так что освежайте свои знания.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Jussi-Pekka Hakkarainen, and I'm working at the National Library of Finland. Better? Okay. So, it's my pleasure to be here, and first of all, I would like to thank Madame Popova for inviting me over here. It's definitely my pleasure to join you over here and discuss about Sergei Fedorovich Ольденбурg. Unfortunately, I'm terrible with headlines, and I don't know why I actually choose this headline, but I'm not going to speak about that. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I think the presentation, what I'm going to give now, is much more interesting than the headline itself. I'm going to speak about the rebirth of scientific contact after the turbulent years of Great War, revolutions, civil war, and commercial blockade. And during this period, it is important to see and notice that the scientific contacts in general were not arranged in a suitable way or proper way. They were sporadic and they weren't bound together as they were during that epoch. So, for instance, there were no structures that could have supported academic work under these new conditions after the Great War. For instance, this is my topic today. The international exchange of publications wasn't organized until Oldenburg and some things came to the stage. The question is, however, how scientific relationships of Russian scholars with the Western countries started to rebirth, and what kind of a role was played by Monsieur Oldenburg. This is my hypothesis. One of the possibilities how these connections started to how they started to re-establish was the food relief for House of the Learned, or Petrokulu, as we heard today from Mr. Sobolev's presentation. I argued that the relief program, which was organized by Finnish scholars in 1921, was actually the first attempt to create the scientific contacts between the Russian scholars in Petrograd and in Western countries. The science was reorganized in Soviet Russia. You probably have read quite a lot of that thing, but one of the attempts how to reorganize these scientific structures was establishment of so-called House of the Learned, or Kubu in general. There were attempts to improve the positions of scholars, those who stayed in Soviet Russia, and the first one was initiated by famous author Maxim Gorky. As we heard today from Sobolev, food relief or food ratios were given to scholars, and they were on the old Vladimir's Palace, where we are going to actually be tonight. But unfortunately, the conditions in Russia weakened, and they affected on the food ratios and living conditions of scholars as well. The head of Petrograd, Maxim Gorky, contacted. They couldn't get any suitable support from Narcos or whatsoever. So they were all the time below the ratio, and they were actually starving over here and freezing. So in impossible situation, Gorky started to contact his old friends across the world Wells was here, and he contacted some French scholars as well, but also he contacted Aksel Gallen-Kallela, which is a famous Finnish artist. He knew Gallen-Kallela back to 15 years. Gorki was a really famous person in 1905, 1906 in Finland, and that's the reason why he knew Gallen-Kallela, and he contacted him. He wrote an open letter that, Aksel, please do provide help for the most precious brains, despite the fact that they wanted to stay over here and work under Bolsheviks, and they don't want to do any new revolutions or whatsoever. They need to be supported to some extent. However, Gallen-Kallela didn't see the position or situation such as he could have supported, but some of the things, some of the Finnish scholars actually started to raise funds in Finland in April 21, and these figures, these people were actually key figures of Finnish Academia at that time. The former figurehead of this project was Andrei Viktorovich Igerström, the head librarian of Russian Library in Finland. The second important person was Vilja Johannes Mansikko, who was ethnographer Slavist, and the third one was Josip Judus Mikkola, Slavist as well, professor of Slavic languages at the University of Helsinki. They knew exactly what was happening in Petrograd and what was happening at the House of the Learned, and they knew that if they don't help, these people will perish. So they started to raise funding, and that happened quite rapidly. Already, once Gorki wrote in March, they had some fundraising concerts, events, money collections in April, May, and in late May already they came to Petrograd and delivered the first shipment of goods. Igerström and Mansikko were, traveling along the wagons from Helsinki to Petrograd. They immediately went to negotiations with Petrograd people who were Gorki, Oldenburg, Tonkov, Verschman, and just key figures of Academy of Sciences, basically. And they made an agenda on relief program. It had actually 11 spots, but I can divide those spots or points into two parts. Arranging the food relief or any given relief for the House of the Learned, and the exchange of scientific publications for the first time since 1914. So basically, the organized book exchange was on freeze. It was frozen, on hold for 7 years, and publications with the scholars were just traveling across to Europe in single copies. And since the agreements weren't anymore, valid, the organized method of book exchange was actually non-existent. Imagine yourselves as scholars, if you can't communicate with the people, with the academia in 7 years. Now it's possible to chat with people online, but 7 years, even back then, meant that you will lose your crown. Definitely. And we are speaking about Nobel Prize winners here. They had a meeting, 28th of May. Oldenburg, Tonkov, Gorki, Verschman, Alodi Rade, these people created a Project Verschman. This document is actually located in the archive back on the backyard of this building. And it is 2 pages long, handwritten program. How we are going to reorganize the book exchange once again. And it was negotiated with these people that, okay, we will deliver books from Petrograd to Helsinki, and Helsinki will start to spread the books. and as a return, they will collect the books what the Academy of Science actually needs and deliver them back to Petrograd. This is, I don't have that kind of fancy picture where you can have Mr. Oldenburg and with these people, but on the left side, in the picture is Vilhelmus Mansikka, in the middle there's Maxim Gorki, and on the right side, Andrei Igostra. This picture is taken from the balcony of the House of Learned. Palace Embankment 26, if I'm not mistaken. This attempt, however, wasn't the first choice to Oldenburg. Moscow people, basically communalists and Bins, started to execute a plan with Leipzig University already, but it wasn't, that book exchange with Leipzig University never ever gained in that level that it could have supported the Academia in Russia. So Oldenburg actually leaned on Igorström and Russian Library in Helsinki, and this was a competitive initiative to bring Western literature to Russia. So at that time, the Russian Library in Helsinki started to become an unofficial center of book exchange. Already in May 28, which is exactly the same day when they had a meeting over here in Petrograd, in St. Petersburg, Gorki applied for an exceptional permission to transport the books to Finland. You've got to remember that Soviet Russia at that time had only one trade contract with the Western country, and it was made with Great Britain, I believe. And the peace treaty between Soviet Russia and Finland wasn't even yet ratified, so we couldn't have any official trade with Soviet Russia. So it looked that the book exchange was somehow impossible, but with the aid of Gorki, actually, that kind of permission was given, and the same applied to Finnish government because they didn't want to make any hassle around this. The Slavists were doing what they were, they knew exactly what they were doing. So the Finnish government said that, okay, you can do this. We don't want to have any political conflicts with Soviet Russia at this time. Do it, but do it quietly. So that's the reason why we don't have, for instance, any news on this kind of exchange in Finnish press. So these people did it underground, but for instance, state railways gave discounts for these deliveries. So it wasn't that secret at the end of the day. So, 28th of May, they made a plan. They contacted the officials over here, and already in the beginning of June, the first set of literature came to Finland. The delivery consisted, all in all, around 4,000 titles, usually in 3 copies. 1,300 books in 3 copies. Almost all of the books were printed by academic sciences or its printing houses. It was any given possible field of research. Some of the literature were actually, belletria was included as well, but mainly these books were science, published between 1913 and 21, just a period that was missing around the world. And this was just the first set. Once it came to Finland, Igorström started to spread the books. And they actually made a plan. I don't have the plan. But I know that it existed. The plan was, and Oldenburg and Igorström, they made it. They listed the institutions with whom they want to cooperate. They didn't choose just any random university, but they actually chose precisely what they wanted. And what they wanted was the biggest possible libraries, institutions, top level libraries like British Library, Smithsonian. They wanted to have the National Library of France over here, but the French are sometimes stupid and they didn't care about this plan. So the War Museum in Paris actually contacted Eaglestrom and they started to exchange the literature. So this was actually written plan, but we don't know what has happened to that. I haven't tracked that down. If you know about that, please contact me. Later in the same year, 21, Gorky, Oldenburg, and the printing house owner Klepen came to Finland to negotiate about printing of Sentября literatura. That wasn't successful, but they also made a plan on regular book exchange. Since the first set was just, punch of literature, they made a really good detailed plan, how many books, which books, where we are going to send them, and the book exchange became regular. It also meant that during this visit, they made this whole attempt public. Mikkola, who was really famous professor at that time in Helsinki, in Finland, actually announced to the press that since the book exchange is now reorganized, the scientific relations between the countries can now be considered as rebirth. So this is the stage, to my opinion, when the science get once again contacted from between Petrograd and Western countries. This is just a picture of those really thick books, of delivered books, where you can spot that the headline of journal and number of pages and price on street or bookshop and how many examples items they have sent and what's the total sum of this literature. They also had literature or publications from the institutions, and this is where Oldenburg was really active. He had detailed lists. He sent them to Eaglestrom. If you're, please do send these publications of GEPs to these institutions. No, if they don't want to have it, please resend these to somewhere else. And they had a really detailed plan where they were delivering the books and how they were getting back from there. So actually, they made a really good network through that attempt. It wasn't like daily exchange of literature. It wasn't kind of library thing that you could go there and borrow a book and then you can return. Of course, these books were sent in sets, and I had tracked down that there were actually at least 5 sets between early 22 and early 23, which were sent from Helsinki to Petrograd. And we know that this new literature that was missing during the war period actually created here to Petrograd a unique place for fresh scientific literature. For instance, the library at the House of Learning was the only place in Russia, in Soviet Russia, where you could study or read the new results of Western scholars, for instance, in technology. Medicine was the other really important field of research, but technology was something that they were really keen on. However, this attempt starts to lose its ground in winter 23, when Russian scholars are allowed to send their articles to be published abroad. Little by little, this, center of book exchange starts to lose its importance, especially once Vox is getting established. Vox started to take care of all cultural relations between Soviet Union and the other countries, including book exchange. So the Academy of Sciences, or Petrokupu, couldn't do that any longer independently. So they were leaning to Vox this time. And this applied to the University of Helsinki as well. Just to 1923, they just contacted Oldenburg or Freshman by letter and said, do you have any new publications? Yes, we can send them to you. And now they needed to contact Vox first, and they were allowed to pick 10 institutions, from Russia, with whom they wanted to have this exchange program. So it wasn't beneficial for the Finns at that time. So they were losing grounds in many fields. The other explanation why these attempts of Oldenburg and Igelström is losing its importance is the fact that book printing, book markets, publishing starts to flourish once again. And already in 1924, there were approximately 16,000 items published in Soviet Union, and just a couple of years ago, the whole amount of printing was something around 1,000 or even less in whole Soviet Russia. So the take off the new printing is rather rapid during the first years of NEP period. And already in November 25, Igelström says that there are already 40 to 50 new private printing houses operating in Leningrad. So this kind of controlling over publications was getting impossible. To sum it up, I argue that despite a short lifespan, the Academic Relief Committee of Finland managed to re-establish the academic relationships with Russian scholars in the course of this food relief program. But also, it is important to notice that this book exchange played a central role when it comes to these connections. And Oldenburg was the key player in this game, definitely. He was controlling quite a lot of things from Russian side, and he was stating what to do, even giving regulations and instructions to Igelström in Helsinki how to deal with the books. So in my opinion, one cannot really underestimate the influence of Sergei Fedорович Ольденбурg when it comes to exchanging the Russian scientific literature and re-establishing the relationships between Russian and Western countries in the early 20s. Thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, please drop me a line. Here's my email address. We have a project website, blog site, basically, Imagined Interregnum. And also, you may find it interesting to log on to my library project, which is available on that lower address, fennojuklika.kansalliskirjasto.fi, fennojuklika National Library.fi. So I want to thank you, and do we have a coffee break? Yes, I think.